Well, with Unit 8, we begin something new. We begin introducing you to the system of symbolic propositional logic. Now, of course, up until now, we've been looking at categorical syllogisms, and they obviously involve propositions also. But the system of propositional symbolic logic allows us to symbolize and therefore to manipulate propositions which are different from the standard A, E, I, and O propositions. So the system is a bit more powerful, or this system of logic is a bit more powerful. In Unit 8, we will be looking at some of the basic features of this system. The system basically is a way of symbolizing propositions and arguments and then showing their inferential connections or relations. Ultimately, what we'll be doing is giving you the power to show that a certain argument, which you have taken from English and symbolized into letters, is in fact valid. You'll be learning how to use a system of rules that will allow you to derive a conclusion from a certain set of premises. But to get there, we need to do some basics first. In Unit 8, really, we'll be looking at the formulation, the grammatical formulation of sentences. It will be looking at how we go about symbolizing the propositions, and also we'll be handling the truth conditions for the different connectives or non-letter symbols that this system uses. All right, let's begin then with a number of questions, true or false. Statements of the form P if Q and Q only if P are both symbolized Q hooks P. Is this true or false? This is true, and I'll give you a little hint about these conditional sentences. The letter that follows an if when the if stands alone, that is, when it's not preceded by an only, always is the antecedent or the first part of a conditional sentence. That is, it will come first before the hook symbol, followed then, in this case, by the P. So if we apply that rule of thumb to P if Q, we get the symbolization Q horseshoe P. Now if we think about Q only if P, you remember that only if is the English version of the horseshoe, the English translation for the horseshoe, and therefore the order will be the same in the second sentence as it was for the first. It may be helpful for you to realize that you invert the order P and Q, as we did here in the first one, only when you have the shortest of the three English expressions. Notice we've got three standard English expressions here: P if Q, P only if Q, and if P, then Q. Notice these two are longer, and those two then get symbolized the same way. They are P hooks Q, but P if Q requires that we invert the order, and so for that we get Q hooks P. Okay. Now let's look at number 2. P if Q says that Q is a necessary condition for P. Well, what we need to know here to answer true or false is how, in effect, we symbolize something's being a necessary condition. There's a little rule of thumb that may be helpful here. Think of the small word sun. This word, you'll see, is visually very much like S hooks N. And what this tells you is the placement of the necessary conditions and also the placement of the sufficient conditions. In other words, when you say that Q is a necessary condition for P, you're saying that Q needs to be placed in the consequent position of the conditional, that is, the second position. So, P if Q is saying, remember, Q hooks P by the rule of thumb I gave you with number 1. Here's an if by itself. The proposition that follows that if then has to be the antecedent, the first part of the conditional. So we get Q hooks P. Q is a necessary condition for P is saying that Q occurs in the consequent part of the conditional. That would mean that we would have to have P hooks Q. So obviously these two are different sentences, therefore the correct answer here is false. Okay, number 3. The only condition under which P hooks Q is true is when P is true and Q is true. Is that right? Well, in order to answer this, of course, you need to think about the truth conditions for the symbol, the hook, the symbol for the conditional. You should remember that that conditional is false just in the case where P is true and Q is false. That makes the entire conditional false. Every other arrangement of truth values for P and Q render the conditional true. So it's then going to be false that the only condition under which P hooks Q is true is when P is true and Q is true. It's false because any situation in which P, the antecedent, is false will make the entire conditional P hooks Q true. All right, so if you have P hooks Q, the conditional, under any circumstance where P is false, the truth value of the larger conditional statement will be true. That makes number 3 false. And one last true-false question. If M is false and R is false, then M, if and only if R, is false. Well, the correct answer here is that this is false because, remember, with the biconditional, what you're trying to do is state an equivalence. What that means is to say that M and R, those two propositions, have equivalent truth values, or the same truth value under all interpretations. Therefore, if M is false and R also is false, that will make the biconditional M, if and only if R, true, because we've said they have the same truth value, namely falsehood. So that consideration makes number 4 false. All right, now we're going to do a couple of problems that require you to decide whether an arrangement of symbols is in effect grammatical or not. That is, whether you have a correct or a rule accepted arrangement of symbols. And if we don't have such a grammatical arrangement, you have to state why. All right, let's look at this. We have either not K and L or P and not P. When I ask whether it's correct or incorrect, remember, what I'm asking is simply whether we have a grammatical statement. We want to know whether this is well formed. And what that in effect amounts to is consideration what the order of the different units or the different elements in the sentence, what that order is. Is it one that's acceptable or not? Well, it's acceptable or not depending upon the functions of the different elements. The atomic elements, of course, pick out individual sentences. Those are brought together to form larger sentences by the connectives. Most of the connectives are two-place connectives. That is, an and, for example, that dot there, is used to link one element, the P in this case, to another element, the not P. The one exception to this idea is the monadic connective, that means a single-place connective, the tilde, the little squiggly thing, which means it's false that. That, of course, operates simply on the adjoining atomic letter, denying the truth of K. Right? So tilde K just means it's false that K. All right, with those things in mind, and with the thought that parentheses are used, or they function, to join or bring together two different groups. Right? In other words, for every two elements, in this case, say the P again and the not P, you need a set of parentheses to join those together. We can ask, whether this sentence is grammatical or not. Well, notice it's an either-or sentence, mainly. This is the main connective, the wedge. And we have a proper ordering of atomic letters brought together by an and, in this case. The first conjunct has been negated, that's fine. And that whole unit then is isolated from the rest of the sentence with this set of parentheses. So this part is perfectly fine. The or is functioning correctly. And we have exactly the same arrangement here. We've got a conjunction on the right-hand side. We've got two atomic letters. This one here has been double negated. There's no problem with using the negation sign twice in a row. And those two units are then brought together by this set of parentheses. So here we've got a correct or grammatical sentence. All right, let's look at number 6. Not H, hooks, P, wedge, parentheses, Q, wedge, S, parentheses. This sentence is not quite right the way it is because notice these two elements here at the beginning. The sentence as it stands is ambiguous over at least two possible readings. Notice, because we don't have a set of parentheses or brackets on the left-hand side, we could either have written this sentence correctly like this, not H, hooks the entire unit, P or Q or S, or alternatively, we could have brought the not H and the P together with a set of parentheses, and then disjoined that to the rest of the sentence, Q or S. Notice that these two possibilities are distinct sentences. The way to see that is this sentence is ultimately a conditional or if-then sentence. It says, if H is false, then all of this is true. But the second sentence is a disjunction. It is saying either this conditional is true or this disjunction is true. So clearly we have two different sentences stating two different things and whose truth conditions would be different. So 6 is incorrect. Now we can move on here to 7. Do we have a correct ordering or not here? Well, notice this has a problem with the parentheses or brackets. A little rule of thumb to remember here is that you need to have the same number of left-hand parentheses and left-hand brackets as you do right-hand parentheses and right-hand brackets. But if you count them, you'll see you've got one left-hand parentheses, one left-hand bracket, but you've got two right-hand parentheses and one right-hand bracket. So we're missing a parentheses, a left-hand parentheses. In fact, this would be the obvious parentheses to add. And notice this makes sense. The disjunction here is isolated by that new set of parentheses. Then this conditional is isolated from the rest of the sentence with this set of brackets. And then the entire sentence, the conditional, is brought together with this outside set of parentheses. So this one is incorrect, and in fact, along with the addition of this extra parentheses here, it in fact would be good if we eliminated these outside parentheses because they don't do much, do they? Since this is the entire sentence, that set of outside parentheses really has not isolated this from anything else. Therefore, they're really unnecessary. All right. And let's do one more of this kind. 8. Well, now notice that we have a conditional here. This is the main connective. And we've got a conjunction on the right-hand side, which is perfectly well formed. But if we look at what we have inside the brackets for the antecedent part, we'll notice that we don't really have enough parentheses to make this a clear sentence. In other words, ask yourself about the part that's in the brackets. What is the main connective? Well, you know it's not the and because that's inside this set of parentheses, but you have no way of determining whether the biconditional or the conditional is the main connective of the part of the sentence that's within the brackets. What we need to do is then introduce another set of parentheses, let's say right there. Notice that what that does is bring the B and U together with the horseshoe or hook, and then that entire conditional is said to be equivalent to P and T, that conjunction. So with the addition of that extra set of parentheses, we have fixed the sentence up, but before that it was incorrect. What you need to do here is to identify what kind of sentence we're looking at. Remember, depending upon which of the connectives that are involved in the sentence, which of those is the main connective, you can determine whether the nature of the sentence is a negation, a conjunction, a disjunction, an implication, or an equivalence. So look at number 9. Which of all of these connectives that occur is the main connective? Well, the way to do this is to start, as it were, from the inside and work your way out. Notice the J is brought together with the G by this biconditional, and it's braced off with that set of parentheses. Notice this whole unit is within these brackets, and then that entire compound conjunction has been negated with this tilde sign. This tilde sign operates, in other words, just on this part of the sentence. That whole negation then has to be joined to the biconditional on the right side by the wedge, or the or symbol, and so the or is the main connective. It's, as it were, the last link that brings the largest pieces of the entire sentence together. So that sentence would be a disjunction. Let's look at 10 now. Here we have a little simpler arrangement. Notice if you've got a connective inside a set of parentheses and there's still something left in the sentence, then the connective on the outside will be the main connective. So here we have a conditional sentence because this unit, this biconditional, is being linked to the Q with the main connective if-then. Now number 11. Notice this is a good example of how the tilde, or the sign for it's false that, works. This operates on everything that is within the braces that follow. So the entire sentence is being claimed to be false. This sentence inside the braces, of course, is a disjunction. But the disjunction is said to be false by the addition of this tilde. Therefore, the tilde is the main connective, and this sentence is then a negation. All right, number 12. Using the same principles as we applied there in number 11, we can say that everything within this set of brackets is being joined to the Z, which stands outside, by the dot, which is the symbol for and. So this sentence has the dot as the main connective, and it's a conjunction. Notice within the brackets, what we have is a biconditional, or an equivalence statement, which is itself bringing together a disjunction with a conjunction. But the main connective is the one that sits outside of those outside brackets and brings the Z into relation with the rest of the sentence. Now we are going to do the real heart of Unit 8. We're going to try to translate some English sentences into symbolic form using the connectives that we've just seen. This is important ultimately because if we're going to develop a system that allows us to symbolize arguments and to show whether their conclusion follows from the premises, we need a way, clearly, of being able to symbolize each premise. So let's start with 13. Neither Mary nor Jan is willing to take the Unit 8 test in logic if and only if the test is too difficult to pass. Well, like the other sentences, we first identify the main connective. Notice here that we have if and only if, that equivalence or biconditional connective, bringing together what is an atomic sentence on the right-hand side, the test is too difficult to pass, with something more complex as the left-hand side, this negated disjunction. So let's start with the easy part. We know we're going to have the biconditional as the main connective, and we know that we have an atomic sentence. The test is too difficult to pass, so let that be symbolized by T. This is the right hand. Now we can focus on translating what's left over, the neither Mary nor Jan part. Neither Mary nor Jan is willing to take the test denies of both Mary and also of Jan that they're willing to take the test. We can do that in one of two different ways. We can either say it's not the case that Mary is willing to take the test, and it's not the case that Jan is willing to take the test. And of course we need parentheses around that. We could also do it with a disjunction and a different placement of the tilde. If we're denying that both Mary and Jan are willing to take the test, we can say it's false that either Mary is willing to take the test or Jan is willing to take the test. Notice that here we have a tilde on the outside of a disjunction, whereas up here we have a conjunction with two tildes that are within the parentheses. But sentences of these two forms are in fact equivalent. This one in English would be said, it's both the case that Mary isn't willing to take the test and Jan isn't willing to take the test, and that, I think you can hear, is the same or equivalent to it's not the case that either Mary or Jan are willing to take the test. So either one of these symbolizations would be correct. (14) Congress will not receive a pay raise unless the Senate approves. Well, again, we have to look at the main connective here. We're bringing together in this sentence the idea that Congress won't receive a pay raise with the notion that the Senate approves, with this connective here, unless. Now, how is unless translated? The simplest way to do an unless sentence is with a wedge or an or. In other words, treat the unless as if it simply said or. Congress will not receive a pay raise, or the Senate will approve. So we have, it's not the case that Congress will receive a pay raise, or the Senate has approved. Notice there's another way of doing 14. In fact, there's a couple of more ways of doing 14, which are equivalent, but which associate 14 with the ideas of necessary and sufficient conditions. If you think about what 14 says here, it's claiming that Senate approval is a necessary condition for the Congress's receiving a pay raise. And if you remember our little rule of thumb about the word son, looks a lot like S hooks N, recall? So we want the necessary condition, the thing that we're saying is necessary, to occur in the consequent position of a conditional sentence. That would mean that we could do this sentence by saying, if Congress receives the pay raise, then the Senate has approved. Also, we could do this in terms of sufficient conditions. The Senate's not approving the pay raise is a sufficient condition for there being no pay raise. That's what 14 says. And that, of course, could be done in this way. If the Senate doesn't approve, then the Congress will not receive its pay raise. Remember again, S hooks N, the sufficient conditions come as the antecedent, and what we were just saying was that the failure of the Senate to approve was a sufficient condition for the Congress's not getting the pay raise. So any of these three symbolizations would be correct for number 14. And a bit later you will in fact learn some rules that allow you to move from a sentence of this form to a sentence of that, and similarly from a sentence of this form to a sentence of the last form. These are all equivalent. They all are good translations of 14. All right, we'll do a couple of more translations. A necessary condition for Alice's not going to class is Bob's and Kathy's both not going. Here again, we've got this concept of something's being a necessary condition for something else. It is bringing together the denial that Alice is going to class with the idea that neither Bob nor Kathy are going to class. Bob's and Kathy's not going are the necessary conditions for Alice's not going, and so the Bob and Kathy part of the sentence has to occur as the consequent of a conditional. So how are we going to do Bob and Kathy both don't go? Well, if they both don't go, that means it's not the case that Bob goes, and it's not the case that Kathy goes. And we're saying that that conjunction is a necessary condition for Alice's not going. So, if Alice doesn't go, then these two conjuncts must be true. So we have a conditional statement translating an English sentence that talks about one thing being a necessary condition for another. And 16. It's not the case that AIDS will not be transmitted just in case you have only one lover. Well, this is pretty complicated because of the number of nots in there, and also the it's not the case and the just in case phrases make it sound a bit confusing. So, just like with the other sentences, what you want to do is analyze it, break it down by first identifying what the main connective of the sentence is. Well, the sentence basically is a denial. Right? It is not the case that all of this is true. So we know that the sentence will be a negation in form, and that gets rid of or takes care of the initial it's not the case that part. So now we can simply concentrate on translating AIDS will not be transmitted just in case you have only one lover. Well, that sentence has just in case as its main connective. It's bringing together the proposition that AIDS will not be transmitted with the proposition that a person has only one lover. Just in case, you'll remember, is translated as the biconditional. It means if and only if. In other words, this sentence, AIDS will not be transmitted, has the same truth value as the sentence that you have only one lover. So now we simply need to symbolize those internal sentences. AIDS is not transmitted is itself a negation. So it's not the case that, and then we need brackets here, AIDS is not transmitted just in case you have only one lover. And we'll let L stand for you have only one lover. And we put the brackets here, and there we now have a negation on the outside and a biconditional, one of whose members is a negation on the inside. So though this looked complicated at first, the way to solve it really is to analyze or break it apart by first identifying the main connective and then symbolizing the different parts of the sentence. All right, one more translation and then a couple trues and falses and we're done. Tom drinks Coke or Pepsi while Dr. Pepper prefers beer or whiskey. Well, notice the comma here in this sentence. That shows you the main break, as it were. And so the while is the main connective. And notice that though this has other conversational implications, for logical purposes, it really doesn't mean anything more than and. The sentence says, Tom drinks Coke or Pepsi, and Dr. Pepper prefers beer or whiskey. This part, Tom drinks Coke or Pepsi, is an abbreviated disjunction. It really means Tom drinks Coke or Tom drinks Pepsi. So let's do that part. Tom drinks Coke, let that be C, or Tom drinks Pepsi. And we'll need a set of parentheses around that because, remember, it's going to be connected to something over here with the while, and we've already said that has to be translated as if it meant and so we use the dot. Dr. Pepper prefers beer or whiskey. Well, notice this really means pretty much the same thing as Tom drinks Coke or Pepsi, right? Here, Dr. Pepper drinks generally beer or whiskey. So we want to have a similar kind of translation. We want Dr. Pepper prefers beer or Dr. Pepper prefers whiskey. And so the whole sentence, again, is an and, a conjunction, which has a disjunction as one of its conjuncts and has a disjunction as its second conjunct. Okay, well, this power of translation, you'll recall, is really at the heart of being able to do symbolic deductions, that is, trying to show by ways of rules that you will learn that a certain conclusion will in fact follow from the premises. By being able to translate those premises, we get ourselves into that symbolic situation that allows us to apply certain rules that you'll learn in a couple of units. All right, Unit 8 finishes now with a couple of true-false questions. Assuming that A, B, and C are propositions whose truth value is true, and that X, Y, and Z are propositions whose value is false, determine the truth value of the following complex sentences. Here we have A or C, or C if and only if B. Now how do we know the truth values of the component atomic sentences? How do we determine the overall truth value of the larger sentence? Well, notice we need to identify the main connective. The main connective is the disjunction. Notice that's the connective that sits outside of the two sets of parentheses. And once again, we need to work our way from inside of the parentheses out. So remember, we assigned the truth value true to A, we assigned the truth value false to Z, true to C, and true to B. Now it doesn't matter which side of the disjunction we start with, but we need to figure out the truth value of this disjunction, A or Z, knowing that A is true and Z is false. Well, if you remember from your reading the characteristic truth table of the disjunction, you'll know that the disjunction is true under every condition except where both of the disjuncts are false. Here we have one of the disjuncts being true, so A or Z itself is true. Now we need to go over and do the other sentence, which is inside a set of parentheses. That is a biconditional, both of whose components are true. Remember, a biconditional is true just in case its components have the same truth value, whether that be true or false. So here we've got a case where both C and B have the same truth value. It's true in that case. That makes the entire biconditional true. Now, in effect, we find the ultimate truth value of the disjunction, the large sentence here, by asking what a disjunction composed of a true disjunct and a true disjunct has for its ultimate truth value. And just as we saw when we did this side of the sentence, a disjunction is going to be true just in case it has at least one true disjunct. Well, in this case, we've got two true disjuncts, and so that makes it even better. The disjunction is true. And so the right answer is true. All right, 19. If it's not the case that B and X, then A or Y. Well, we first have to identify the main connective. The main connective here is this conditional. It's bringing together a negated conjunction with a disjunction. So again, we have to work from inside out. That means we need to assign our true to an A, B, or C, our false to X, Y, or Z. So we start here, and then we work out the larger sentences that occur within the parentheses. Here we have a conjunction. Remember, that's true only if both of the conjuncts are true. Otherwise, it's false. So this is false. Then this conjunction is negated by the tilde on the outside. In other words, this tilde operates on the conjunction which is inside the parentheses. That will then flip the false value to true. Now we need to move here to the disjunction. A disjunction is going to be true if it has at least one disjunct true. The A is true, so A or Y will have the truth value true. And now we determine the entire, or the truth value of the entire sentence by, in effect, bringing together a true and a true with a hook. The characteristic truth table of the conditional tells us that it's going to be true when I have a true antecedent and true consequent. So the entire sentence has the truth value true. All right, we're going to do one more, and then we're done with Unit 8. This is a nice long sentence. But again, it works on the same principle. You build a sentence of this length up by, in effect, starting with smaller elements and connecting them with the different connectives. Notice that these brackets here show us that this entire conjunction is being disjoined to this disjunction. That identifies this as the main connective, this disjunction as the main connective. So we begin again by assigning true to A, B, and C, false to X, Y, and Z, and work our way out. A conditional with true antecedent and true consequent is true, but a conditional with a true antecedent and a false consequent is false. Now this is a conjunction within the brackets whose one conjunct is true, whose other conjunct is false, making the entire conjunction false. Remember, conjunction is only true when both of the conjuncts are true. This side is a disjunction, X or A. It has one true disjunct, which is sufficient to make the entire disjunction true. And now we determine the overall truth value of the large disjunction sentence by bringing together false or true. False or true is a disjunction which has the truth value true. Okay, there it is, the basics. We will be building on these same ideas in Unit 9 and showing you the method of truth tables. And then the later units from 10 to 13 will take these basics and generate this system of deduction, which is our ultimate goal in the course. So long.